Here, thanks.
I'm from Washington, D.C., so with full authority, I sing this song. Look here, people, won't you listen to me? Don't you try to find a home down in Washington, D.C., 'cause it's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. I got the bourgeois blues. I'm gonna spread the news all around. That Billy was talking about himself and his wife. He said, me and Martha, we went all over town. Everywhere we went, the folks were turning us down. 'Cause it's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. I got the bourgeois blues. I'm gonna spread the news all around. Well, it's the home of the brave and the land of the free. I don't want to be mistreated by no bourgeoisie, but it's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. I got the bourgeois blues. I'm gonna spread the news all around. This is the verse that got me in trouble. Now the rich man in Washington, he knows how to throw a nickel to the mayor just to see him bow. Oh, it's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. It's a bourgeois town. I got the bourgeois blues. I'm gonna spread the news all around. And for the things that I cannot say publicly about Washington, D.C. I certainly hope you know what I'm talking about. We need statehood now. 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 We need statehood Oh, I already called her. I mean, I texted her. Hello and welcome everybody to the Mid-Atlantic National Welfare Rights Union Truth Commission. And please excuse me, just as we were revving up to go on, we had a power surge. So my computer went out, and so I'm back joining you now by phone. Hopefully we'll get it back on shortly, but I do want to welcome everybody to the Truth Commission. And I do hope that you will stick with us and share this broadly with your friends. Those of you who are watching it on YouTube, please share, because we want this message to go out, that this Truth Commission is being held on behalf of all of us who work in this country. Now, you know that if you work, whether you're getting paid for it or not, that it's those of us who do the work, who make and produce everything. We sow the seeds, we reap the seeds, we process the crops, we distribute them, we consume them, we even make our own replacements. So this is really a Truth Commission for and about the workers, the working class, the class that we all belong to, even though in America we're told that there's no such thing as classes. So anyway, I am the president of the Great Panthers of Metropolitan Washington, here in your nation's capital. And it's my pleasure to MC this program tonight. And first on our agenda, I want to introduce the president of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization, whom we all affectionately know as Miss Mo, because she is one fierce warrior for justice. And she just really don't like any BS, which is how she got Miss Mo. So when you hear her, you'll understand why we call her Miss Mo. Miss Mo, would you take over?
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. I echo what my colleague just said and offer certainly greetings from Michigan Welfare Rights. And just so pleased and humbled to be part of a series of truth commissions that are being offered by welfare rights enclaves and affiliates across the country. And my colleagues, Michelle and Rick out of DC, when we talk about powerful, you can go to the dictionary and go to the letter P for powerful, and there'll be a picture there of Miss Michelle and Mr. Rick. My task this evening is to introduce the concept of a truth commission. Welfare rights has been involved with truth commissions for a very long time, and it is a specific tool. It's a tool in our toolbox that we use on a fairly regular basis, mostly by the National Welfare Rights Union, in an effort to collectivize and offer testimonies from different parts of the country, from witnesses and persons who are able to talk about their lived experiences that detail the violations that have happened to them directly. These lived experiences bring a lot of clarity and unify the testifiers in such a way that it proves that they are victims of similar events. And it takes away this myth of individual responsibilities for their individual plights. We're going through something quite similar with that now, in terms of the police department in city A, the police department in city B, the police department in city C, D, and all the way through. Different police departments across the nation have indicated to us over and over and over again that the problem is external to the police departments. We're talking and looking at a virus inside policing, and it can only be fixed with a systemic approach. Well, that's the kind of a concept that the truth commissions are trying to lay bare. Low-income persons are told so often that the reason for their individual circumstances because of the choices that they made. So over the next few minutes, the next couple of hours here, we're going to listen to a variety of individuals who've been told The reason for your problem is because you chose the wrong complexion, the wrong nationality, the wrong partner, the wrong religion, the wrong path to education, the wrong zip code, all of these things that have happened to you happened because of a decision that you made. And all of that information is incorrect. So our task as members of the National Welfare Rights Union is to try to frame these events in such a way that we are able to point out to everybody that's on this call what my colleague Michelle just talked about. And that is, there's a question of class, C-L-A-S-S, class, that exists in the United States of America. Contrary to public opinion, when some of us got here one way, others of us got here another way. And in the history books, it says we're all equal and we're all even. And by now, it's only been 400 or 500 years. You should have been able to figure out that that's not true. There are classes. Using this instrument we call the Truth Commission is very critical to our understanding, because we believe that the view we should take to try to get to social justice and identify and label social justice violations, they work best in terms of revelations and being clear. If we look through the social justice lens of class. Now, our human condition is connected to our class connection. We are working people oppressed and violated by the 1%, who are this corporate class entity who live only for profits at our expense. And so who are we talking about? There ain't no middle class. You got two classes. You got those folks that, just what Michelle said, they own things and we produce whatever it is that they own. So we're talking about caretakers, oftentimes not paid, school teachers, bus drivers, policemen, them too, social workers, fast food workers, slow food workers, factory workers, restaurant workers, nurses, doctors. We are all working for a living. And even though some of us get paid and some of us do not, we are still all members of the working class. Now, the lens that we choose to look at is really based in an economic point of view. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is going to be discussed by another one of my colleagues. And that particular document, if you don't have one, you must get one, a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it is a document that defines what the rights are of every human being. And what I'm talking about, not the Constitution, the preamble. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it says that each individual, each human being has the right to a decent standard of living, a right to be protected from harm, the right to be cared for if injured or sick, the right to be fairly paid for work done, the right to rest, the right to have access to education, and special rights are given to mothers and fathers with children. So nations read and agreed to adopt these economic human rights principles. And these are the demands that we stand on and circle all of the information that we're going to provide for you this afternoon, or I guess evening. My name is Maureen Taylor, and I stand as the state chairperson of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. And I will turn the program back over to Miss Michelle and Rick. Who might be still dealing with the power outage and trying to make things work.
I'm sorry, I forgot to.
Okay, all righty, you got it.
And so next we're going to have the history of the United Nations
Be the last time. I'm sorry. Who was that?
But go ahead. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, good. No, I was saying you've heard from Ms. Moe, and now you're going to hear from some of the people who are testifying this evening. But first, to give you a history of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because we're putting this in a human rights framework. And in fact, the series of truth commissions Ms. Moe was talking about are going to culminate.
And so now we'll have David Smockler to give us a little bit of the history of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so David, just let me know whenever you'd like to start the show.
I'd like to start right now. Thank you. My name is David Smockler. I'm the past president of the Detroit and Michigan National Lawyers Guild. And I'd like to give a little legal framework for what we're about to do here tonight. We have some esteemed members of the community who are going to sit as commissioners. And then we have people from the community who are going to testify before the commissioners. And they are going to tell their stories in the context of what Maureen has described as a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was created on December 10, 1948. After the Second World War, after the scourge of fascism, people wanted to codify what are our human rights? Well, what can we expect? What is right? And Eleanor Roosevelt, the widow of US President Franklin Roosevelt, led the drafting committee. The United States signed the Declaration in 1979, but it was never sent to the Senate for ratification because of the politics we know that exists in the United States. Virtually every country in the world signed and ratified the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the United States did not. But the law of international law says that if a government hasn't signed a treaty and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was submitted to the Senate as a treaty, it must refrain from acts which would defeat the object and purpose of the treaty until it shall have made its intention clear not to become a party. And the US has never made its intention clear not to become a party to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They just haven't ratified it. Maureen has told you about some of the articles in the Declaration of Human Rights, and we're going to be looking at people's economic rights. The Declaration of Human Rights focuses on economic, social, and cultural rights, but we're going to be looking at people's economic rights because without a decent standard of living, you can't have any other rights. And the economic rights that Maureen mentioned, Article 19, freedom of opinion and information. You have a right to form an opinion and to receive information to make that opinion. The right to desirable work and to join a trade union. The right to an adequate living standard. The right to an education. These are all human rights. Now, also, we're going to be talking about, and you can see that the title of our webinar is We Charge Genocide. There is also a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide, which was passed unanimously by the United Nations General Assembly on January 12, 1951. The US did not sign or ratify the Treaty Against Genocide. The economic human rights guaranteed under the Genocide Convention include Article 2C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And in 1951, a group of Americans brought a petition before the United Nations called We Charge Genocide, the petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime of the United States government against the Negro people. That was submitted in 1951 and again in 2014. The Truth Commissioners that will be sitting and listening to testimony should answer the following questions. One, are these economic human rights violations that the witnesses are testifying to? 2, could they have been prevented? 3, who is responsible? And 4, what is the solution to these economic human rights violations? Thank you. I know that you will enjoy the program.
Thank you so much, David. Okay, I remember to unmute myself. All right, thanks folks for bearing with us. Okay, the first group that is testifying, and I will just introduce them briefly to you. You will hear from Reverend Graylin Hagler of Plymouth United Church of Christ. You'll hear from Deanna Edwards out of Baltimore, Stephanie Reich out of Washington, D.C., and Miss Minnie Elliott, also out of Washington, D.C., president of the Brookland Manor Tenants Association. And so, Reverend Hagler, you're on.
Want to make sure I unmute myself. Good evening, everybody. I trust you can hear me.
Oh, yes.
And you know, as I was sort of thinking and listening to the opening and the presentation and the various comments that was made, you know, one dimension that often gets overlooked in everything we do is that spiritual dimension. That spiritual dimension that particularly feeds the soul of people to continue to resist the powers of evil. Right now, I'm leading folks in a study of Revelation, which is a book, last book in the New Testament. Well, what that book is, as I was defining, is a struggle against gods, G-O-D-S, that there is a God of the empire, and then there's a God of the people. And the God of the empire continues to try to regulate life economically, existentially. It tries to define who and what people can do and how high people can rise and what type of conditions people must face. So we have this struggle that continues to go on and has gone on through history between rich and poor. And obviously the rich seeking to get richer at all means, and that means to make the poor poorer. And so we struggle against that. And as I come to you this evening, I'm just thinking about the battles that we've had over the years, and many of you know a lot of these battles, and many of you know them better than I do. You know, but for example, here in Washington, D.C., we dealt with the dynamic a number of years ago of Walmart Corporation coming into the District of Columbia and wanting originally to open 6 stores in neighborhoods. And obviously they were here because they saw Washington, D.C. as a changing economic market, and they wanted to make money, and the politicians were willing to bend over backwards to give Walmart every accommodation that they could give to Walmart. None of us who were on the opposite side believed that Walmart was interested in 6 stores. They were just going to tell the politicians whatever they could tell the politicians until they got what they wanted. And that's precisely what happened. They opened a few stores and locations in which they wanted it, and they really avoided any of the Black community. And we put forth a bill knowing that they were up to that ploy called the Large Retailer Accountability Act, which would force corporations like Walmart to have to pay a wage of $15 an hour as a part of making sure legislatively, legally, that a corporation like Walmart would have to share the wealth in the District of Columbia with the workers. You know, as Walmart turned and said, if they pass that in DC, we're going to leave. And all the politicians got afraid. We did win the Large Retailer Accountability Act, but it was not by a veto-proof majority. And therefore, the mayor, which was Vincent Gray, vetoed that legislative piece, saying that it was poor business and that he had a food desert in his ward where he lived, which was Ward 7, and then Walmart was coming into Ward 7 and was going to alleviate the food desert. Well, I got news for you. As soon as the Walmart got what they wanted, they had no interest in Ward 7, in Ward 8, or any other wards that were predominantly Black. And at the same time, we lost the ability to hold a Walmart accountable. Well, the politicians, at the very least, in trying to cover themselves politically, decided that they were going to pass minimum wage law in DC that would eventually raise the wages in DC up to $15 an hour. But that was after we had basically put the pressure on and exposed people for being the hypocrites that they were, that they turned around and tried to save their own political skin and basically put in place a legislative piece that would attempt to guarantee at least the incremental increase in salaries every year until it got to $15 an hour. But you know, one of the things that we hear people talk about $15 an hour, and we know that in most of these metropolitan areas that is still not enough. And the other thing that some workers educated me about, and I didn't think about it until I heard them say it, they said, yeah, we want 15 and we want 40. $15 an hour and 40 hours a week. Because the reality is a lot of these corporations and companies avoid bringing on people full time so that they don't have to pay benefits, so they don't have to do any of the other things that are required by law to basically dignify work. So that's one of the things. The other thing that we were engaged in and have been engaged in has been the work around one fair wage. And you heard lifted up in terms of people who work in restaurants and wait tables and are dependent upon tips. They continue to be paid at a subpar wage. And the argument is that, oh, you know, they make tips. And so that's even better than a full-time salary, a guaranteed full-time salary. Well, that's not true. If you are one of the privileged that got a job in one of the fine dining restaurants, you can make the money. But what about all the other smaller restaurants where that is not in place? And also it's a system that is open to exploitation, into wage theft, and to discrimination, and to abuse. And it also is the vestiges that come to us out of Jim Crow, where basically white folks did not want to pay black folks a full-time wage, and therefore wanted black folks to work for tips. And so that's where that history lies at. And so we were trying in a great way a lot of that history. Well, the voters in DC passed. The voters in DC passed a One Fair Wage Act to basically wage everybody would pay. There would be no two-tier employment. That passed in DC, and the city council proceeded to undo the vote, and they owed the votes of the people on one fair wage. And we had to battle, and we attempted to battle to try to overturn the city council. And the only way we could overturn the city council was with a referendum that in effect would stop the city council about where the people can vote. A few days, we had roughly 30 days in order to get some 25,000 valid signatures, to put together a team and to get more than 30,000 signatures. And as we were putting those, turning them in to the Board of Electoral Association, took us to court.
Michelle, you need to unmute.
Thank you. Okay. That's a nice jacket. It fits.
Michelle, who's next?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, because that's the problem. I couldn't hear. Okay, we're now here. Oh, I'd already said Deanna Matthews. She is speaking from the perspective of a public housing residents, and I am going to read her testimony on her behalf. I am a dialysis patient, so when I got COVID-19, it was very hard for me. I lost the use of my arms, legs, and my voice. My insurance took me out of a good hospital and sent me to a worse hospital that was far from my home. It had no heat and the rehab services were terrible. I was treated badly because I'm poor. My blessing is my loved ones who continue to help me on my road to recovery. It's funny what a difference a year makes. Last year, I didn't know any homeless people, and now I know many. The saddest thing is that the money was there for public housing over the years, but it instead went to projects like the Inner Harbor and casinos, while empty buildings are sitting and going to waste. I always try to manage my money when buying food, but now even the reasonable stores are too expensive. This is what poverty means to me. I hope this letter reaches you in good health. Deanna Matthews. So, and next is Stephanie Rice.
All right, thank you. It's an honor to be here and an honor to get to know everyone here, to know Rick and Michelle for so many years. My name is Stephanie Reich, and I'm a member of the Great Panthers of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and of Jewish Voice for Peace and of Occupation Free D.C. Jewish Voice for Peace participates in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement globally, the global movement against Israel that Palestinian civil society launched in 2005. We support the Palestinian demand for right of return for Palestinian refugees, an end to the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and the Syrian Golan Heights, and full democratic rights for all Palestinian citizens of Israel and all Palestinians who live either within the occupied territories or within quote unquote Israel proper. Part of both JVP's work and Occupation Free DC's work has been the exposure of Israeli training of US police forces and law enforcement agencies, which has led to greater militarization of police forces throughout the US and increasingly savage repression of Black, brown, poor, and working people as they demand social justice. The repressive nature of US police forces, though, is nothing new. It dates back to the slave capturing squads of before the Civil War, the extermination wars against indigenous populations throughout US history, the repression of the labor movement of between the 1870s and the mid-20th century, and it continues to the present day. Today, US law enforcement agencies keep Latino and Latina, Filipino and Filipina, and Yemeni farm workers working under inhuman conditions. These law enforcement agencies herd child refugees from Latin America into prison camps and separate them from their families. They continue to murder African Americans and Hispanics on the slightest pretext. US law enforcement agencies also incarcerate 5 times as many African Americans as white people. The law enforcement dimension of the US's special relationship, in quotes, with Israel began in 2002, 1 year after the US launched its quote unquote war on terror, which was a war against the people of Afghanistan and Iraq. Then during that year, the Jewish Institute for National Security in America, JINSA, began its Homeland Security program, and this program featured training seminars in Israel for higher ranking police officers from Maryland and many other states, as well as for FBI, CIA, and future ICE personnel. Instructors at these seminars included Israeli military personnel, agents of the Shin Bet, which is Israel's counterpart to the FBI, and because of the expertise of both groupings in quote unquote repressing terrorism, which means, of course, repressing Palestinian activism. Another of these seminars in 2003 featured identification of quote unquote terrorist cells. Charles Ramsey, who participated in this seminar as Washington, D.C.'s police chief, praised his Israeli instructors. In 2006, US and Israeli law enforcement linked the quote unquote war on terrorism to the war on drugs and petty crime, when Avi Dichter, the former head of the Shin Bet, told a conference of the International Association of Chiefs of Police that ideological terrorists, meaning Palestinian activists, recruited from quote unquote pools of criminals, and that Iran and Hezbollah, the organization which had been fighting and resisting the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon since the Israeli war on Lebanon of 1982, were smuggling drugs into Israel. This three-way linkage that Israel charged led police officers in many US cities to increase their practice of stopping motorists, and particularly African American ones, for traffic violations without probable cause. US law enforcement agencies also used this linkage as a pretext for surveilling the Black Lives Matter movement, Muslim and Arab communities in many cities in the US, and through campaigns to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline led by indigenous activists. In Maryland, Rafi Ron, the former chief Israeli security officer for Israeli airport security, founded and served as chief executive officer for the New Age Security Solutions Company based here in Maryland. And this company developed the Screening Passengers by Observation Technique program. That's the SPOT program, which many US airports have adopted since 2006, and in which uniformed officers scrutinized passengers for gestures and mannerisms pointing to stress, nervousness, or suspicious intentions. The officers would then engage these passengers in casual conversation and then, as they deemed necessary, send them off for further screening or even to the police themselves for additional questioning. Between 2003 and 2020, more than 200 federal, state, county, and municipal law enforcement officials from around the US had attended Israeli policing seminars under the GINSA Homeland Security Program, and thousands more had attended conferences in the US that were led by Israeli quote unquote anti-terrorism or anti-Palestinian experts. In 2016, the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish community had joined GINSA in sponsoring instruction in Israel for higher-ranking police officers, including the US Capitol Police. And this instruction included extrajudicial executions, torture, surveillance, and the use of force against peaceful protesters. Now, Amnesty International, other human rights groups, and even the US State Department have all cited Israel for these infractions. With the help of its connections to US law enforcement, Israel has been able to use Palestinians within quote unquote Israel proper, the West Bank, and Gaza as trial populations for its weaponry and law enforcement technology, which it has then exported. Between 2008 and 2018 alone, US military assistance to Israel amounted to $30 billion, billion with a B. And as of 2018, Israel was one of the top 10 global exporters of weaponry. US law enforcement agencies have extended contracts to Israeli surveillance companies right here in the US, such as Nice Systems, which operates a camera network for Baltimore City Watch program. Nice Systems, together with Varent, another Israeli company, also holds contracts with the National Security Administration, the NSA, for providing line tapping technology. Cellbrite, Yet another Israeli company holds contracts with police departments and law enforcement agencies in over 20 states, under which it specializes in gleaning data from cell phones. It's no accident that, given its history, US law enforcement forges ties with repressive states like Israel in a futile attempt to thwart the social justice of people of color, poor people, and working people the world over. And the Occupation Free DC, an outgrowth of Jewish Voice for Peace, has made it a special project to link up with organizations fighting police brutality and to focus on and make everyone aware of Israeli training of US police forces throughout the country and the greater militarization and brutalization of the police force. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now we're going to hear from Miss Minnie Elliott of Brooklyn.
Hello. Hi, my name is Minnie Elliott. I'm from Brooklyn Manor. I'm the president of Resident Association, and I want to thank you all for having me. I'm not familiar with the organization, but Lucy and I've been friends for over 25 years. So of course she referred me. We've been into it in the days, I say in the good old days, Martin Luther King and all the other, we've been out there and all. So I'm glad you all are having me and what you all have said so far. I'm really, really, really interested in it because there's a lot of things that, you know, we need to get together and make a difference. I mean, we've aged out, but sometimes we have to be out there for the younger ones that's coming behind us, because I don't think a lot of them is as dedicated, or I want to say, or want to be involved as much as we were at that time, or think that is important. My biggest thing is with Washington, D.C., during our time, of course, at one time it was Lily White, and you and I know that, Lily White. And then other people, but Marion Barrow made a big difference in this city, whether people want to give him the credit for it or not. He made a big difference. And Kimmy Gray, that's another one. People don't call these names. Petey Green, he was crazy, I don't know what, but he talked. These are people that we really have to recognize. You know, we go back in history and we want to celebrate this, but we have people that we can identify with, and our kids should identify with the show that they made a difference in the city. And I think sometimes we forget about that. So that's why we have to start over and over and over again. My thing is over here at Brooklyn Manor. I moved over here at Brooklyn Manor because I got custody of my kids. I had a daughter, younger daughter, that I'll say she was in the bracket of the Peter Pan time. She had her problems and everything else, and I raised her kids. I had to find a larger place to move, so I moved over here at Brooklyn Manor at that time. And that's been over 29 years ago that I moved here. When I moved here, my other daughters didn't even want me to move here because they had heard a lot of things about Brooklyn Manor and whatever it is. But Brooklyn Manor and Brentwood have a really, really history that we should study about too, because it's very, 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 very deep. You know, we don't study our history. You know, we moved here, we moved there, but we don't really study our history like we should. We're the only race that I know we have 5 or 6 names. We don't know who we are half of the time. You know what I'm saying? We've been colored, Negro, Black, you name it. You know what I'm saying? But we're here and we're here to stay. You understand? And we're important and we're blessed. We're a race that are fortunate. I know that, and all of our kids should know this also. But getting back to the fact, when I moved over here to Brooklyn Manor, I met Eugene Ford Sr. that owned this property. And I got to know him because he had a lot of violations over in the property and everything like that. So I got involved. We created the ANC, We started the resident association. We the only resident association that's been existed over 27 years over in this area. And we nonprofit. We have a lot going, and a lot of the seniors, some have passed, but we were really out there doing a lot of things to change the neighborhood, and which we did. Eugene Ford Sr. played a big part. Marion Barry and Kimmy Gray played a big part over here, telling us to organize in order to make a difference, because this day and this time was coming. And I tried to tell a lot of people live here that this day and this time was coming, that we need to organize and whatever, what we need to do. But of course, at that time, it was during the drug area, and Brooklyn Manor was one of the most popular places in DC. I mean, we had a lot of working class people, kids that went to college. We have Anita Barnes that even lived here and raised her. A lot of people might not be aware of it, but she lived here at one time. You know what I'm saying? She don't live too far from here on Bates Street, which is another place that I lived at up in that area also. So we all came from here, and that's why I can't understand why we don't think it's important for us to combine together to build like other people do. We so busy into the development and giving everything away to the big developers now. And then we want statehood. We say we want statehood. But if you want statehood, why are you making the people, like you say, the working class people? You understand, the working class people, regardless whether you have a job, you help build this city. Why are you taking all this away, asking for statehood, but making us slaves? And that's what they're trying to do, making us slaves to the developers. We got to start being more careful about who we select. You understand? It's not all about a black face or a blue face or a green face. It's a person that makes a difference. That's the biggest thing. So my thing is that we at Brooklyn Manor, the man who owned it made a commitment to us because we helped him save this property. HUD was going to take this property away from him. That's the owner. And he made a commitment to the people here. Of course, a lot of them have died or whatever it is, but they're kids here, that they would always have a place here affordable. And that he always wanted to try to do a training program. But of course, he aged out and he died, and his son took over. His son was never, ever, and I know this personally, and I can make this statement to the paper, and he knows it, for affordable. So his chance was to come in and to fool, and we, of course, I went along with it to try to make a difference for affordable places for it. We want development, we want them to build, but we want our people of color to have a place here on this property. That's what we wanted. And that's all we asked for. We had even McDuffie that came in that walked away from a meeting that didn't even take an interest in even listening to what the people had to say. And he's in the pocket, because in his office, the lady who, when we had the hearing that represented Mid-City at the hearing that we fought for, she used to work for McDuffie. You understand what I'm saying? So everybody's in the pocket. Then we got DCRA, the director and the head of that person working for Mid-City. You understand what I'm saying? Then Mid-City is buying property on Rhode Island Avenue and other different Catholic charity and everything else. Where's this money coming from? So my thing is that I'm just glad you hear me. I want to put this out when you say rights, because I think that this needs to be investigated, because before it's all over with, DC is going to be where no one is of color or black or white or working class going to be able to afford to stay here. So just thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you so much, Miss Minnie. When I was talking to you on the phone and you told me you were 83, I was like, nah.
Yes.
Just so you know, there is no aging out in welfare rights.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
You are ours forever. because this struggle is a lifetime struggle because we are fighting for our lives.
Yes, we are.
And so we need to reach people who understand that so that we can help spread the word, because you're right, a lot of people believe the things that we have been taught. When I moved to Washington, D.C., and I met the first day, I learned that not only was D.C. not a state, but it had taxation without representation.
Yes,
Because
yes.
Josephine Butler was one of the first people I
Yeah,
met.
I know. I used to, when they built her place up on 15th Street, so
That's
you know I
right.
go back a
So I know
long
you
way.
know. So, but the point is that, and a lot of people don't know that, and I do want to share with people that the reason we chose this day to hold this Truth Commission is because today is a holiday for the District of Columbia. It is DC Emancipation Day. It is the only legislation that was passed, DC Compensated Emancipation, that freed the enslaved in the district, because Abraham Lincoln bought us. And he paid for the 3,100 slaves who were still here in the district. And so we got emancipation 9 months before the rest of the country learned about the Emancipation Proclamation. But we did it on DC Emancipation Day because we want the rest of the country to know that we are the last colony, that this is still a country that does not believe in democracy, has never practiced it, and we are the living proof. But as we've said before, and one of the reasons we're doing this in an economic human rights framework, because we are learning that these things are our rights. And so we want what's ours, and we're coming to get it. So that's what we're here letting people know. So anyway, thank you so much, Miss Minnie, for your contribution to this Truth Commission, and know that you are one of ours. Welfare rights doesn't leave anybody. You can't age out because we just don't let you.
I just want to add this too. A lot of people haven't mentioned this, but Councilman Orange is the one that signed this paper for this to be a holiday. They don't recognize that either. You know what I'm saying? I just wanted to put that in fact. I don't know whether people are aware of that, but he fought the. Okay.
But thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. And now for the people who are viewing, we're going to be taking a short break. I keep losing papers.
Look for me and I'll be there. Look for me. Look for me and I'll be there. Look for me. Somehow, someday. You're not alone. Well, how could you be? Somehow, someday. We'll find each other one until we can make people to recognize they themselves have to make the struggle and have to make the fight for freedom every day, in the year, every year, until they win it.
We are the National Union of the Homeless, and we're taking HUD houses against today.
It takes organization. It takes dedication. It takes a willingness to stand by and do what has to be done when it has to be done. Can you feel who's talking on the
You gotta forget about it being against the law. I don't care. I'm dying in the streets. I think that's against the law.
Get down, get down, get down, get down. Music's too loud. Look for me and I'll be there. Look for me. Look for me and I'll be there. Look for me. Look for me. Look for me. This is another great success. Look for me. All the homeless people come together and they show us that we can do something.
All right. All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed that. I know I've got a 30-second delay. I'm not sure I've completely compensated for it, but I hope you did enjoy that video. And I recognize a lot of familiar sights and people, so we really enjoyed it. So we're now getting ready for our second round of testifiers. You will hear from John Steinbach, Rebecca Bonham, Dr. Edwin Chapman, and Reverend Annie Chambers. So, with no further ado, John, I saw you earlier. You on? Unmute yourself and you go ahead and talk.
I'm totally unmuted, so I'd like to wish a good evening to everyone, the commissioners and the fellow panelists. I'm reporting from here in Virginia. I have submitted my written testimony, and that's going to cover what I'm going to speak about here. So let me start by saying that I've lived in Virginia since 1981. And in 1986, my wife and I, Louise Franklin Ramirez, a Gray Panther as well, moved to Prince William County. And when we got here, we found that it was a very interesting community, but there were great changes taking place. Increasingly, it was becoming a bedroom community of DC. It was becoming much more diverse, and it was a center for Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi organizing. An example would be that the state championship baseball team in Brentsville was using a Ku Klux Klan ceremony in the batters up circle before every game, and the coaches knew about it. So out of this was formed a group called Unity in the Community, which became the most prominent civil rights group in Prince William County, and later on led to some really great interfaith organizing. And so over the years in Prince William County, there were many struggles. The authorities were going to build the world's second largest garbage incinerator just upwind from working class neighborhood near Lorton, near where the Fairfax garbage incinerator already was. We fought that back. Walt Disney was going to build an East Coast Disneyland on historically African-American and Native American lands out in the thoroughfare area and the settlement area. And we fought that back and we won that struggle. And there were many other struggles. One of the issues in Prince William County is that as it became more of a bedroom community and as neoliberalism took hold and more corporate headquarters moved to Washington, D.C. to put their snouts in the trough, more and more building took place in Western Prince William County. This was overwhelmingly immigrant labor, overwhelmingly undocumented immigrants from Mexico were doing the job. And the backlash against this was the most anti-immigrant legislation in the entire country. The same legislation that was passed 2 years later in Arizona and in Alabama was passed in Prince William County unanimously. They all passed it, and it was chaos. And Mexicans Without Borders, Woodbridge Workers Committee, and other groups, some progressive African-American pastors stood up, supported the community, and we organized the largest protest rally in the state of Virginia. 10,000 people rallied against the legislation. So these are just some examples of the fightbacks that have taken place in Prince William County. I want to focus on something that we called the Virginia People's Assembly from 2007 to 2019. Every year, organizations from throughout Virginia, from the South Side to the Southwest Virginia in the mountains to Tidewater to Northern Virginia, activists would come. And we would have several hundred activists. A lot of the times we would meet in Ashbury Methodist Church, which is an African-American progressive church on the outskirts of Richmond. We'd come together for an entire weekend and we would share our experiences and we would network and we would plan and we would come up with what we called the people's agenda. And we would present that to the legislature when they would convene later on in the month of January. So I just want to wrap it up now because I know we had a 5-minute limit and I want to stay within it. So there's a lot more in my testimony, but I want to focus. I mentioned the name Thoroughfare. We beat back Disney. Thoroughfare is a very important community. It was one of the first, perhaps the first major community of freed African Americans. This is before the Civil War. And the freed African Americans settled in Thoroughfare with the Native Americans. So Thoroughfare is proudly a biracial, multiracial, historical community. And what's happened recently, and this is ongoing as of today, the cemeteries there are 4 or 5 primary cemeteries. 3 of them are under attack. We found out today that one of the cemeteries has just been bulldozed. The graves have been bulldozed over. The trees have been ripped down. One of the cemeteries, which is called the Pottersfield Cemetery, that has grave sites going back to the 1860s, has been blocked with a gate, with a chain, with a 24-hour video camera, and all communication has been broken off. So as before, the response of the community has been overwhelming. Native American groups, the NAACP, have rallied in support of the families. There's a GoFundMe page. If you type in thoroughfare, you can make a tax deductible contribution to it. And we've raised $6,000 so far, and the struggle is just starting. But I just wanted to end on that as an example of people standing up and people fighting back. And then the last thing, this is in deference to my friend and mentor, Rick Tingling Clemens, who I can see there in the background. And Rick always reminds us that there's no peace without justice, and that as we fight for justice, we need to fight against militarism and war and imperialism and nuclear weapons. That they go hand in hand, and we can't have one without the other. So that's how I want to end my testimony, and I'm going to stick around if anybody has any questions. And Michelle and Rick, thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome, John. Okay, I forgot who I called next. Oh, Rebecca. I know I saw her.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for having me today, y'all. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, and you can see me. Okay. So I'm just gonna read from my testimony. And yeah. My colonized name is Rebecca Bonholm. I'm a working class cisgendered African woman and mother. I'm a US born daughter of Haitian immigrant parents. My parents came here in search of the American dream, the propaganda that the U.S. capitalist colonial state uses to blind us and keep us Africans, Blacks, melanated folks mentally and physically enslaved to exploit our labor. For as long as I can remember, I lived and continue to live in neighborhoods with high police presence on the streets, at schools, community gathering places, along with the check cashing, fake fast food, liquor stores, dialysis clinics, and funeral home establishments on each block. Housing, healthcare, food, and safety is not a given, and it's a constant struggle just to survive. Growing up, I lived in and navigated two different worlds: the pro-African Black Haitian culture at home and the anti-African Black US culture in other spaces. I have constantly had to reconcile these two worlds. My parents believe in the American dream, mind your business, follow the rules, get an education, work hard, and you will make it in life. We still haven't made it. Why is that? Because the dream is not for us. Africans in the US are not seen as humans, but dispensable, inanimate objects, vehicles for cheap labor, incapable of feeling pain, and undeserving of human rights and dignity. If we act or speak out of line, we are harassed, killed, you name it, we have been through it. The terror, violence, genocide we continue to experience is somehow justified in this white supremacist, patriarchal, militarized capitalist society here in the US, in the belly of the beast. In February 2003, I stopped trying to reconcile both worlds when I had my first encounter with the police at 17 years old, just 1 month before my 18th birthday. I was part of the pep squad team made up of Black and brown students cheering on our school's basketball team during a away game at a majority white affluent school in a neighboring town. At the end of the game, on the way out, members of the pep squad team, including myself, had verbal encounters about the game with the white students, which is normal in those type of atmospheres. All of a sudden, a white male police officer came from behind me. Slammed me on the table against the wall, handcuffed me and shoved me to the police car, and shoved me into the police car. I proceeded to ask why was he pushing and hailing me with excessive force, and so did the other folks witnessing this. I never received a response to my questions, nor was I read my rights. The even more profound question is, why were there police officers with guns at a high school basketball game? I was charged with resisting arrest and obstruction of peace. I was supposed to be the good one. What of the bad ones? The use of camera phones and social media are shedding a light on the murder of Africans, Blacks, at the hands of the police, the military arm of the U.S. state that protects the interests of the capitalists who hoard power and resources for the benefit of the few and at the expense of the masses. Africans know that we continue to be terrorized and experience genocide ever since we were stolen from Africa and brought to these shores. Slavery has not ended for us. It has simply transformed into a present day form of the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration. Go take a look at the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The 13th Amendment states, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. One must ask, who has the power to invent what is and what is not a crime? Who are the most criminalized groups in the U.S.? In 2014, after the cold-blooded murder of the 12-year-old Black boy Tamir Rice, I decided that I would be part of the solution. As a mom of 3 Black boys, I decided that I need to join the movement to protect our lives as Africans in the U.S. and defend our human right to survive and thrive. After searching for an organization that aligned with my values, I joined Pan-African Community Action, PACA, located in DC, Southeast DC, which is also a member of Black Alliance for Peace, an anti-war coalition, in 2017. Our current campaign, PACA, is fighting for community control over police or safety and centering the experience and leadership of working class African women, LGBTQ, and other marginalized groups. The U.S. tells us that we can't breathe, we can't live, our lives do not matter. We Africans are not the problem. We know we have the human right to breathe, to live, to matter. What some folks call the American dream is not a reality for Africans here in the U.S. The reality for us is the American nightmare. For anybody who knows the real history of the United States, Africans are not the ones who need fixing. Free the land, all power to the people, free Mumuia Abu Jamal. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. And Dr. Chapman, I saw you back up there in the corner.
Good evening. How's everybody?
Fine, thanks.
So I'm Dr. Edmund Chapman. I came to Washington in 1964 as an undergrad at Howard University. I stayed on and went to medical school at Howard University College of Medicine, and then stayed and did an internship, residency, and fellowship at Old Freedman's Hospital and the then new Howard University Hospital. So when I came to Washington, there were many more hospitals than we have today. I did part of my training at DC General Hospital, which closed about 20 years ago. I also practiced at Capitol Hill Hospital, which is now closed, Providence Hospital, which is now closed, and of course, some of my colleagues who were in OBGYN practice at Columbia Hospital for Women, which is now closed. So we all know that United Medical Center has suffered economically, and that was by design, because as gentrification is pushing uh, minorities and people of African descent out of the city, they're also pushing the medical professionals out of the city. So unbelievably, the city agreed to a new hospital agreement on the St. Elizabeth's campus, but excluded Howard University faculty and students. And this was signed off in about June of last year, which is unbelievable. Universal Health Systems and George Washington Hospital refused to sign a contract if Howard University faculty and students were included. So with a government with a Black mayor, a Black deputy mayor for health, chair of the city council, health committee, and city council itself signing off on a contract like that, the handwriting is clearly on the wall. There's no guarantee or support for the current physicians who are at United Medical Center and staff who obviously have fought through this COVID pandemic. And you've heard absolutely nothing negative about their performance. But at the same time, we know that the union workers at those hospitals have, again, no guarantees that their jobs are going to exist. So we're basically seeing what I consider to be a system based on eugenics that corresponds with the push by the previous Trump administration to require work or community service, even for Medicaid. So that was clearly designed to push people off of Medicaid. And they attempted to do that in several states. I don't think any of them actually passed. And of course, when COVID hit, then everybody realized that when 40 million people lost their jobs, they also lost their health insurance. So we're the only industrialized country that does not have national health insurance. And we now have a fragmented health system that's dominated by corporate America. And every trick in the book is used to keep people from getting the services that they need. There's a lot of talk about the supply side of opiates pushed by the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmaceutical distributors, but very little talk about the treatment side for the problem that they created and the barriers that exist where patients are limited in accessing medication or the amount of medication that they need to combat this problem. So again, corporate money has bought off the politicians, and we see during COVID there was a 20% increase in the overdose death rates across the country, with Washington D.C. leading with a 50% increase in overdoses, and we have seen a 200% increase in overdose deaths among the homeless from 2015 to 2020. So again, we can see how housing, healthcare, and the economics of healthcare, who provides the treatment and who gets treatment, is all tied up in this corporate dominated system. So again, it's our leadership that, and I tell folks all the time, I have no problem sending emails to the mayor and everybody on the city council, and they can come out on 17th and Benning Road and get me. They've audited me about 5 times over the past 3 years and haven't had to return a dime. So we're going to take care of our patients, but we're also going to expose the hypocrisy that this government, including people that look like us, have imposed upon us. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you. Wow. Okay. The next person speaking is going to be Jane Zara. She's a good friend of Great Panthers, and she has lots of titles, but I will suffice it with letting you know that she's a lawyer for the people, because she went to law school to get a law degree so that she could help fight for the people. Foolish woman. But anyway, Jane.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jane Zara. I live in DC. I was co-commissioner with Rick, and we fought battles originally. Well, we met in the Green Party, the statehood Green Party, and we decided to fight our first legal battle to reopen libraries in DC when Fenty had boarded them up. So we won that battle. And if you come to DC, you'll see how beautiful the libraries are. Now they're a point of pride for the politicians. Only we could do that for everything else, right? So I'm here to talk about a legal case we've been involved in the last 2.5 years, but which the plaintiffs, about a plot of land that the plaintiffs have been involved with the community residents in Ward 7, Deanwood, and including Rick and Michelle for procedural posture, which has undergone a lot of permutations. And the legal travesty that we have been enduring on a procedural level through the courts, as well as through every agency that's involved with residential, like I could name drop the agencies that have, what I would say, for lack of a better term, conspired in backroom deals to get this plot of land where it is right now. Okay, so I know I'm speaking very generally. So the land involves this trapezoidal property, which is about 10 or 20 feet from the lead plaintiff, Dorothy Douglas, who was an ANC commissioner in 7003. So we have in DC, the ANC is a fairly progressive notion. If you think about it, it's kind of the first tier of governance that neighborhoods can provide. It's an elected position, but it's nonpartisan. So people like me, that's a federal worker, can also do it without getting hatched. And you know, it's a conduit between the community and the various agencies. So this plot of land had gone through a lot of things. It had a major garage and pollutant site in the early 70s. God knows what happened before that. Eventually, it was owned maybe by a preacher nearby. And then a developer got it and said they were going to put a housing complex on it and worked with the community for 8 years to get input into this community. But then when a couple of the agencies said, you're going to lose 3 of your units, and then the housing market was tanking in 2015, they stopped paying taxes, the developer, and then they let it go for 3 years. And in the meantime, the place was completely neglected. Everyone was parking there who wanted to, that didn't belong there. There were numerous exploded vehicles left on the land. One was with 9 propane tanks within 20 yards of one of the plaintiffs that was left there for months until we filed the lawsuit. So there was this abandonment because of economic reasons. And then all of a sudden, instead of the housing complex, they decided that they would build a firehouse, an EMS, and a citywide Fleetwood storage facility on this land. They declared without any hearing or public notice that a residential neighborhood there's a right to have a firehouse there. But none of the residents that would be affected by it were ever notified. The hearings were never. And then the Mayor Bowser, sent a letter to the council saying, we got a contract for $1.5 million a year to rent this land from this developer to put this public facility on this private land. And so we know there's statutes that prohibit that. So the way to get around those statutes right now, that's not what the letter said, is if you don't say anything pro or con on the floor or through communications, I guess, by the council for 10 days, on the 11th day, the contracts will go through, okay? So they did that. So the problem was plaintiffs were trying to figure out, there were rumors about some firehouse being built, whatever. It was to replace a fully functional firehouse a half a mile away, the first or second African-American firehouse in DC. And furthermore, the property that it's going to be moved to has CRX and Metro Rail tracks precluding it from going in one direction in the city. It's precluded from going through the other direction in the city because of Dorothy Douglas and the other plaintiffs' houses and a dead-end street. And so it has to go out past houses within 10 feet of houses constantly, and then go out on this dangerous intersection to either go east or west or north or south. It's completely ridiculous if you look at it from a logistical point of view. And I'm geographically challenged, even I know that. There have been bus crashes into it since the lawsuit, was filed. There have been speeding, and they have to take over the public roadways and change them in order to do all this. And this is a matter of law, all right? So let me just tell you the allegations that we had I don't want to bore you too much. And then what has been dismissed and why and what we're up against, okay? Just briefly. So count one, the Advisory Neighborhood Commission Act. Once the ANC found out about it, they opposed it. The community vehemently opposed it. There was never any, it was a consensus. They didn't want it there. And why are they doing it? And why didn't we hear about it? And by not notifying us, second one is, sorry, there's a few allegations. Second one is, the DC Environmental Policy Act. So DC EPA, which basically has to have at least the same protection as the National EPA Act, okay? The third one is Real Property Disposition Economic Analysis Amendment Act. That was what kept us in court to make them reopen the libraries. That law in DC is, if you're changing the disposition, like you're giving away public property, because there's a pattern in DC of giving away public property. That's why we started this whole thing with the public properties. Once you give away public property in DC, it never comes back and the people lose, right? So if they're closing the original firehouse, they have to have a hearing about it and say why. Well, lo and behold, you know what they did? Just like the shelters and the libraries, they let the whole thing get dilapidated. And then they said, oh, it's dilapidated. that's a good reason to move it, right? So this is what happens. That's what happened at Franklin Shelter. That's what happened at La Casa Shelter. The list goes on, right? Okay, hold on. A Procurement Practices Reform Act. That's where there were two statutes where if it's over $1 million and over a year, you have to have a hearing on it, right? And if you don't, you wait 10 days, blah, blah, blah. Well, the judge threw that out because she said, even though they broke the law, they have legislative immunity. So they threw that out, okay? We sued the developer, and the developer wants to, and built a firehouse on private property. So we sued him along with the mayor and the DC council, right? And the judge threw, and then the developer went after me with sanctions. Sounds familiar, right? Well, the judge threw the sanctions out against me, but she also said, no, Valor, the developer has nothing to do with it. She just left the mayor in. So she threw out all the defendants that we put in except the mayor. She threw out, we have a due process claim, right? Because of everything that was done. This community, it has been there. Dorothy Douglas is an elder African-American who has been there since 1974 of very limited means. You know, she's an ANC commissioner.
But
She runs for public office. Yes, huh?
I said, but she owns the house.
And she owns the house, and she's right at the front line. I mean, what they've done to her. We also have a takings claim because of what they're doing to deteriorate the property of the residents. And we have intentional infliction of emotional distress because of what they're doing. We have negligence per se, because if they violate statutes, then that's a negligence per se claim. We have a negligence claim. They've never mitigated anything they've done. Okay, so what happened? We filed this 2 years ago, and we've had 5 TRO hearings, right? 4 or 5. And so what the judge basically did, she threw out the council because of legislative immunity. It didn't matter, they violated those statutes for procurement. She threw out the developer Valor because they said, this isn't about, they're not state actors. They don't have any nexus. If they're building and housing a public firehouse, right, on their private land and getting over $1.5 million a year. And so she's saying, no, they're not state actors, right? And then she kept in the ANC statute because of some cat fight that happened, but not because of proper notice, proper regard for their concerns and opposition and representation of community. And then she let in the DC EPA, and she let the case languish for months and months and months until the city and Valor, the developer, built the whole thing from the inside. And now they need public roadways. And then we brought in experts to analyze the evidence, spent a lot of money. And, the experts were their, environmental experts, and they analyzed, and the judge threw out our motion to compel discovery. And she said it's limited to the administrative record. So we brought in experts to look at the entire administrative record, which was quite lacking. And they said, what they did was typical. They built from inside out, and now they need public roadways, and they need, to comply with X, Y, and Z because this triggers the DC EPA and the NEPA. And so on and on and on. After the whole thing was built and the public roadways were made, she dismissed the case. We're now in appeal, but between dismissing the case and the appeal, the developer called Dorothy Douglas and said he wanted to, kind of buy her out. And plaintiff said, no, we want you to move the firehouse. And so in 7 minutes, they said this conversation's over. And then after that, they had a blue ribbon cutting ceremony 2 days ago. So you see, you have the court hand in hand with the various agencies and these backroom deals. So now we're on appeal, and we can write chapters about it, and hopefully we'll publish that, but I don't know, we're gonna keep fighting this battle. I'm hoping that this is kind of it's not anecdotal, but kind of a legal, kind of like metaphor for what's going on in terms of environmental racism. The plaintiffs are African Americans, mostly elders that have been living there a long time, directly impacted by the construction and noise. And we'll see what happens when we get another judge to look at this case. That's our only hope. So, I mean, the question is, do you go through these legal hurdles to do this, and what does it amount to? So the verdict is still out on that.
Well, Jane, thank you for trying to make this legal conundrum we've been struggling with understandable. But I've been involved in it, and I know. I mean, basically, what it is it's a lot of effort to share legal terms to say this is yet another way to screw us over. So it's sort of like living in a country that that makes it illegal for some people to learn to read and write, does not guarantee people literacy, and then says ignorance of the law is no excuse. So that's and right now, this part of the city that Jane is talking about is the part that's targeted for massive gentrification and rapid gentrification. So that's really what we're fighting out here. But I want to thank
But it's also the daring procedural violations.
Right. The more history we read, the thing is, we think like, well, damn, they couldn't do that. But then we're living with it, and they're doing it. And I mean, we've been involved in the case, so I don't want to drag it out, but it is in fact a conspiracy. It's literally a conspiracy between the mayor and the city agencies against the community. And that's
okay. One other example, the last example is we went through this painful hearing. Okay, so DCRA says what's zoning, what isn't. Okay, zoning, you could have this, if this is a zone, you could have this. So they said, oh, residential neighborhood, you could have a firehouse. Of course you can, it's the right, just read the law. So we go to this hearing to challenge it. The BZA is the appellate entity of DCRA. So we're sitting there we had to sit there from about 8 in the morning till 7 at night. And so, but if you look at what the hearings were about, it would be about, oh, somebody's planting a flower box, which is 4 feet high next to my structure, right? Like all of these things, which might be concerns to residents, or someone's putting in a driveway. We're talking about, and then they admitted, oh, we're putting in a citywide Fleetwood facility as well. That's the first time we found out about it. So you have this these expenditures for these hearings, right? Where they're like, oh, you're putting in a driveway, or you're putting in a wall that's so high, or you have to chop your tree down. And we're talking about a firehouse, an EMS, and a citywide Fleetwood facility. And they're like, you know what? You didn't have notice maybe, but you didn't appeal this in time, and you appealed it to the wrong entity. And we're still waiting for the final written decision to appeal.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So whether you understand all of the particulars, it is a clear conspiracy to remove us out of this neighborhood. And this is a community where a lot of people actually own their homes, and it's got more space. It's not crowded like downtown. But I don't want to delay this because the time is ticking, and we're now at a break because the commissioners need an opportunity to meet and review the testimonies and talk about it and come back and give you their findings. So in the interim, there's going to be a break. We're going to get a chance to give the people the right to vote, which was authored by Sweet Honey and The Rock. And it's really the history of why DC is not a state yet. But first, we're going to hear Invictus from one of our commissioners, our own Gray Panther business manager, Rick Tingling Clemens. Rick, you want to?
Yes. Invictus, I don't know if folks are familiar with it. It's up on the screen now, but it was recently a movie produced by or about Nelson Mandela
And the rugby
pushing
team.
and the rugby teams, the black and white rugby teams, and getting them to play together and to learn to fight together. And in some ways, that's what my wife and I have chosen to do, to work with all kinds of people, because this world belongs to us, and we must manage it as we understand. And what we understand is that we all can, and we all need to, and we all must live on this land. So I like to thank to all of the folks who have testified, the folks who haven't testified yet,
Go ahead and speak.
because they've done a hell of a job in letting all of us know what kind of world we're living in and what we have to do. All right, this poem, I thought it was very good because it reflects some of my aspirations as I'm going to call myself a revolutionary. And it starts like this. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In this fair clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shed, and yet the menace of the years find and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gauge, how charged the punishment of the stroll. I am the master of my faith. I am the captain of my soul. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, now it's time for the commissioners to talk amongst themselves, and we will be back with their findings shortly.
Give it a number.
No taxation without representation. 200 years of exploitation in the capital of this nation. No representation in the capital of this nation. 200 years of exploitation. Give the people their right to vote. Someone asked me, was it true the voting rights of the district were long overdue? They couldn't believe it when I said yes. And then I said, you ain't heard nothing yet. We are based in Washington, D.C., a truly diverse community. Almost 6,000 strong have been exploited much too long. Inadequate power over our own affairs and national issues for which we care. No votes in Congress, the Senate nor House. No state delegation nor representation. We pledge allegiance, my country, 'tis of thee. Fight in wars, pay taxes in this country. Provide work and services for the government. We get no vote, but our money is spent. You may wonder, how in the world can this be? I thought we lived in a democracy. The U.S. Constitution gives equal protection. Check the 14th Amendment to make this connection. No taxation without representation. 200 years of exploitation in the capital of this nation. No representation in the capital of this nation. 200 years of exploitation. Give the people their right to vote. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was ratified. U.S. Congress won the power to exclusively exercise, in all cases, legislation over the future capital of this nation. In 1790, selection of the district site began using a piece of Virginia and a piece of Maryland, forming the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C., but the people kept on voting in their former states, you see. In 1800, Congress took control of D.C., ended representation for the whole community. And in the history of this country, you'll find the reason why. And even in a new millennium, they want this law to apply. In 1846, the portion of D.C. from Virginia decided to retrocede, and it was returned to the original state line. Alexandria and Arlington became after this time. In 1871, an elected delegate with no vote was created for the House of Representatives. No joke. D.C. was given territorial government that year. Representation remained an issue. Do you hear? In 1874, financial troubles arise. The position of non-voting delegate meets its demise. The territorial government that was given to D.C. was taken back to Congress at this point of history. In 1970, the House brings the position back. Years of civil rights activism brought pressure with no slack. A step in the right direction brought people so much joy, and the man in this position was Walter Fauntroy. In 1978, Congress finally said okay to the Voting Rights Act, but not right away. If approved within 7 years with no hesitation, D.C. would be granted full representation. In 1985, our hopes were really, really high. We knew that we should sure not let this bill die. All we needed was approval of 38 states, but only 16 states would support our case. In 1993, the district made a giant step. Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton worked hard to get a D.C. vote on the House floor, which Congress did approve, but when Republicans came to power, the decision was overruled. No taxation without representation, 200 years of exploitation in the capital of this nation. No representation in the capital of this nation. 200 years of exploitation. Give the people the right to vote. Now, I'm sure you are wondering what can be done. There are at least 4 ways that this fight can be won. Some suggest we retrocede as part of Maryland, become a city or a county in that state once again, or a new law could pass with a congressional vote. D.C. residents would be counted in the Maryland vote, or federal elections census taking without retroceding back. This would leave our residency intact. Or Congress could pass another law for D.C. like they did in 1800 when they took over totally. For more than 500 reasons, they treat us like a state, and adding another reason should not a problem create. This would give us 2 Senate seats, and the census would determine the House of House seats. Preferably, D.C. would be the 51st state. We'd have a seat in the House and 2 in the Senate. It's not too late. Democracy is what we want. Voting rights are what we need. Tell your congressperson it's time to take heed. Democracy is what we want. Voting rights are what we need. Tell your congressperson it's time to take heed. No taxation without representation. 200 years of exploitation in the capital of this nation. No representation in the capital of this nation. 200 years of exploitation. Give the people the right to vote. 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 Sweet honey in the rock.
Michelle, you're
Okay, yes. Thank you so much for unmuting me. Thank you very much for that rendition of Give the People the Right to Vote, because as we said, it really is a history for people who don't know. And the next and near the end of this program is the commissioner's report. I'm going to ask Ms. Mo to come back, join me again as she gives kind of a summation of the commissioner's report, which is going to be preliminary, of course, because this is just one in a series of truth commissions. Ms. Mo?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it appears as if once again, and I'm certainly referencing 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when we had the Truth Commission testimonies from folks on the West Coast. The story, be it on the West Coast or on the East Coast, the information seems to always be the same. Today, I think we heard a recitation about international oppression. Folks in Palestine and other places not being able to access those things that equal food, those things that equal housing, those things that equal access to those points of survival. So we heard that report. We've heard several outstanding testimonies about housing and the difficulty of housing, the difficulty in holding on to affordable housing, where some of our testifiers gave outstanding and very rich, robust testimony about what it was when they first got to a decent place for housing. And then over a period of months and years, how things seem to change as we are being gentrified out. We heard reports about police brutality and young girls 17 years of age, and here the police come and physically and aggressively injure her. And the injury might not have necessarily been physical, but the fear that's in your heart when a policeman with a gun grabs you and holds on to you and puts you in a police car and you don't know how it's going to end. We have a lot of that going on, and how that circumstance, and I'm sure there were others, pushed this young woman into a life of dedication, having to do something about the condition of America that became very clear to her and her young children. We heard quite a bit about disappearing hospitals. This was quite new to me. I think I've heard Rick and Michelle talk about the number of hospitals that have been closed in Washington, D.C. But tonight, I think we all heard information that said this hospital used to exist, this hospital used to exist, this hospital used to exist. And so there's always an ongoing push to exacerbate whatever survival opportunities and resources there are in communities. And I think I want to, I'll end this part of my report, and my colleagues certainly free to join in. These are things that occur in working class communities. You know, where rich people live, however many hospitals and clinics they have, they still have them today. And so things only start to dry up, close up, and move away in those areas where working class people live. Often use that example of I never heard of the police running up in Kennebunkport or one of those places where the Bushes live or the Kennedys live or one of those kinds of places. All the things that happen to working class people happen in the neighborhoods where we live. So it's not just that the police are anxious to shoot Black people, because they shot a 13-year-old, a Hispanic kid just yesterday, night before last. There's some 2-3 stories about 2 Appalachian whites in the West Virginia area that got shot 2 or 3 years ago, and they're bringing that case up. And this is what happens where we live, where working people live. So I think that the stories of oppression and exploitation and egregious violence happens across the country. And I believe that our outstanding, I tell you, if I didn't know, these were outstanding expert testifiers that once again tied our lives and our capacity to try to survive and then thrive. They tied our lives together and presented it to us. I'll stop to see if the other commissioners have anything they'd like to add.
That's you and Larry. Okay, that's Larry, Rick.
Well, I would like to add, and thank you, Ms. Moe, for your assessment of what's going on. But a lot of us know that we live in a capitalist country. And for those who don't know what a capitalist country is a country that where workers do all the work and the rich take all the money and the resources and whatever they can get from us working and producing products for them to sell. We must learn how to, because the only thing that we haven't done, and it's something we already know how to, I started to say we must learn how to, but we already know how to sell ourselves and sell our goods. And so I am saying that I have questions about this economy and the fact that it will ever solve the problems of the working class. And therefore, I suggest that the commission go ahead with its report to the UN and charge the United States of America with genocides. That is exactly what is happening to us. Thank you.
Larry? Unmute yourself.
Thank you. I got it. I just want to echo what both of you said. You know, it was very interesting that that people tend to describe two worlds, you know, in terms of what's going on. That that you had people like Rebecca, who was talking about what happened when she was a PEPS when she was in high school and had treatment in terms of that those of us who didn't grow up in the neighborhood she did would never have experienced, you know, in terms of school and as part of the PEP squad team. Likewise, you had the woman who talked about being a slave to development, and it's done completely for profit. It's not done for the benefit of the neighborhood. The idea that the results of the issue, the whole Walmart's coming in and coming in, but it wasn't for, but it was done only for people that could, in terms of people making money. It certainly didn't benefit the people in the community. It didn't provide the full service grocery stores to the people who needed it, et cetera. And likewise, in terms of the healthcare, you know, I'm from Cleveland. And over the years I've lived in Cleveland, I've seen all the, for the most part, most of the safety net hospitals that have been in Cleveland all leave and go to the suburbs, either close or leave and go to the suburbs. The Cleveland Clinic, which is the big hospital in Cleveland, has remained, but really serves the rich. It does not serve the poor communities around it. And I think that amplifies what was said in the statements today. And I think that we need to recognize that and say that we demand the human, as stuck at the beginning, we demand the economic human rights that everybody has a right to, regardless of your income and your race.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Ms. Mo. I want to give thanks to the Gray Panthers of Metropolitan Washington. Really glad to see some of them in some of those statehood photos. I want to give thanks to the National Welfare Rights Union, to the commissioners, to the tech team, people all in the background, and thanks everybody for sticking with us during our electronic issues, which this time weren't anything that we could have done anything about. The power surge I'm talking about. But I really want to thank the people. I want to thank the people who testified, everybody who came out and testified and shared their stories of pain that we all experienced, but you put it in words that really made it live for us, and it's something that we're going to take beyond this Truth Commission and take it to the UN, compiling it with the other testimonies we've received. And we know that we have more than enough evidence of genocide of practices going on in this country. You know, the first time the charge of genocide was made from this country was in 1951, folks. 1951, that's exactly 70 years ago. And William Patterson was not deterred. He went back 20 years later. He did it again in 1970. And then he died, and then somebody else picked it up in 2017. So what we're saying is that the struggle is prolonged, the struggle is protracted, but we're in it for the long haul. We want what's ours because we know these things are our rights, and we're coming to get it. So that's where we stand right now. We want to thank you all for joining Welfare Rights in this. And I'm sure I must have forgotten it's always a problem when you're thanking people. But if I forgot your name, please don't be offended. Just recognize it as one of these things that happens as you get older.
Our leadership.
And I want to really thank our leadership. We didn't have Marion Kramer with us tonight, but she has provided stellar leadership to this organization for years, and she's just recuperating from surgery, but we want to thank her, and I don't know if she's still watching, but she couldn't be on with us tonight, but she's in the fight for the long haul. So thank you, Marion. Thank you, everybody who's not here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Free the land.
Well, thank you everyone for your tireless work at putting this together. I know it wasn't easy, but it was really great.